Hello, dear listener. I am grateful you are here with me today. Please subscribe so you can stay close for the next story and tell me in the comments which city or country you are listening from. It always touches my heart to see how far these moments reach. Enjoy the listen. Her story begins in the soft light of a fading afternoon in Pennsylvania, where a young girl named Elizabeth Cochran sat by a quiet window searching for something she could not yet name. Her world was small, but her imagination was vast, stretching beyond the dusty roads and gentle hills that framed her childhood. She watched people pass by, watched the world turn with a kind of hunger in her eyes, a hunger for truth, for justice, for a life that reached far beyond what society expected of a girl like her. She did not know then that she would someday become Nellie Bly, the fearless journalist who would break open the walls of corruption, expose the cruelty hidden in institutions, and change the course of journalism forever. She only knew that she felt something stirring inside, a restlessness, of fire that refused to stay quiet. Her father died when she was young, leaving the family without the protection and stability they once knew. The world grew harsher, the struggle heavier. She learned early that life does not always soften its blows, that sometimes the path ahead is carved only by persistence and courage. She looked at her mother, at the fear that comes when security disappears, and she promised herself she would grow into someone who did not back down, someone who moved forward even when the ground trembled beneath her feet. Years passed, and the young girl grew into a young woman filled with curiosity and determination. One day, she read a newspaper article that claimed women were too delicate, too emotional, too fragile to work or study in the same ways men did. The words stung like shards of ice. She felt anger rise within her, not a wild, raging anger, but the steady, cold fire of someone who knows the truth and cannot allow a lie to stand unchallenged. She wrote a response, bold and clear, powerful enough to reach the editor of the Pittsburgh Dispatch. The editor read her words and felt something electric, something undeniable. He invited her to write for the paper, and in that moment Elizabeth Cochran shed her old life, like a fading shadow, becoming Nellie Bly, a name she would carry into history. But Nellie was not made for soft assignments or safe columns. She was not interested in society pages or polite chatter. She wanted the hard stories, the ones people avoided, the ones that exposed injustice and demanded change. Her heart beat for truth, and she followed it even when it led her into darkness. She began writing about working women, about poverty, about the silent suffering that filled factories and streets. She wrote with empathy and fire, painting the truth in ways that made powerful men uncomfortable. Her words carried weight, her voice carried force, but not everyone appreciated the light she shined into hidden corners, and soon she was pushed off serious assignments and reassigned to quieter topics. But Nellie was not a quiet woman. She refused to fade into the safe shadows they built for her. She wanted the truth, the whole truth, and nothing less, and she understood that sometimes the only way to uncover injustice is to walk straight into the heart of it. So she made a decision that would change everything. She would go undercover into one of the darkest institutions in America. She would enter the Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum, a place whispered about with fear, a place where women were locked away, forgotten, mistreated and silenced. Nellie would pretend to be insane. She would enter the asylum as a patient and reveal the truth the world refused to see. She prepared herself quietly each night, pacing, rehearsing, imagining the terror of being trapped in a place where no one believed her, where every cry for help was dismissed as madness. She knew the risks. She knew she might never make it out. She knew that if she failed, the truth would stay buried, and she would be buried with it. Yet she did not back down. She did not hesitate. She stepped forward because she believed that no woman, no human deserved to be lost in the shadows of abuse. Late one night, she stood before a mirror and practiced the breaking of her own mind, the trembling, the confusion, the distant stare. She let fear move across her features like a dark cloud. She let her voice slip into the fragile echo of a woman unraveling, and soon she became the character she needed to be, a lost, frightened soul abandoned by sanity. She traveled to a boarding house and began her performance, trembling, shouting, clutching her head, pacing the hallways, refusing to sleep. Her cries filled the air until the police were called, and in a matter of hours, Nellie Bly began the most dangerous journey of her life. They brought her before a judge, her hair tangled, her eyes wide, her voice broken. She begged for understanding, spoke with trembling incoherence, and the courtroom whispered she must be insane. In that moment, the doors of the asylum opened for her, and the world she knew slipped away. As she crossed the threshold, a cold wind brushed her face, a chilling reminder that once she entered, she would have no name, no voice, no power, only the courage she carried inside. And so the gates closed behind her, sealing her into a world of pain. She had chosen to enter a world she would soon expose, with a voice powerful enough to shake the nation. She stepped out of the asylum gates with the weight of 10 days pressed into her bones, yet something inside her burned brighter than when she had first walked through those doors. She felt the cold morning air kiss her skin, as if the world were welcoming her back, and for a moment, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to breathe again, slowly, deeply, like someone reclaiming her own life after standing face to face with the shadows of cruelty. Her story had only just begun. New York City stirred beneath a pale dawn sky, and the streets whispered with the soft rumble of wheels and voices. As the city awakened, Nellie felt her heartbeat align with that restless rhythm. She was coming back not as a victim, but as a witness carrying truths that no one had dared to reveal. She made her way toward the office of the New York World, every step filled with purpose. She remembered each woman in that asylum, their trembling hands, their tear-stained faces, their whispers begging to be heard. She promised herself she would not fail them. When she reached the newsroom, the air was filled with the clatter of typewriters and the murmur of hurried reporters. But when Nellie walked in, everything seemed to slow. The editor raised his eyes, and for a rare moment, even he looked uncertain as he studied her. "You made it out," he said softly. She nodded, her voice thin but steady. "I have everything." She sat down at her desk and began to write. Each memory poured out in waves, unfiltered, unsoftened, every cruelty, every neglect, every story of suffering told with the raw honesty that only someone who had lived it could deliver. Her words came like a storm, fierce, relentless, unstoppable. Hours passed, yet she barely moved. Her mind replayed the asylum corridors, the hollow sounds of footsteps, the distant cries echoing through cracked walls. She saw again the pale flicker of candlelight on the frightened faces of the women locked away. Without mercy, she heard the cruel laughter of those who claimed to care for them. And she kept writing. Her editor hovered behind her, reading the unfolding truth, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the gravity of her experience. "They cannot deny this," he murmured. "They cannot hide from this." When Nellie finally finished, she leaned back, exhausted yet unbroken, her hands trembling from the weight of everything she had poured onto the page. The article was printed within days, and when the public read her words, the world shifted. People gasped, cried, raged. They had never imagined such horrors could exist inside institutions meant to heal. Their outcry surged through every newspaper and every street corner, until the ripple became a wave. New York officials were forced to act. They investigated the asylum, and their findings confirmed every detail of Nellie's account. Reforms were demanded, and for the first time the women inside those walls were truly seen. Nellie stood in the back of the courtroom as officials described the inhumane treatment exposed by her bravery. She felt a swell of pride, but also sorrow. She had carried their voices, but she knew that nothing could erase the pain these women had endured. Still, change had begun, and change was powerful. As she left the courthouse, a crowd gathered around her. Some lifted their hats, others simply placed hands over their hearts. She saw gratitude in their eyes. She heard "thank you" whispered over and over, but Nellie only smiled gently, because she did not chase fame, she chased truth. That night, she walked along the East River, the city lights shimmering across the water like clusters of hope scattered across the dark. She wondered what other stories hid in the corners of the world, stories waiting for someone bold enough to uncover them. And she felt that tug deep inside her again, the same tug that had pushed her into the asylum, the same tug that had whispered go when the world said stop. Her next story was already calling. She looked up at the wide sky stretched over New York and whispered, "I will keep going. Because courage does not rest. And truth does not sleep." And Nellie Bly was just getting started. The city rolled into winter with a slow, quiet breath, and Nellie felt that familiar restlessness stirring again inside her like a tide rising against the shore. She could not ignore it, because her purpose was not a single victory. Her calling lived in every hidden corner, where a story waited for light. After the asylum report, her name traveled far beyond New York. Some praised her courage, others doubted that a woman should dare such dangerous work. But Nellie had heard resistance all her life. It never stopped her, not once. One morning, as she walked through the bustling newsroom, she overheard the editors talking about a secretive employment agency known for deceiving immigrant women with promises of work only to trap them in harsh conditions and unending debt. She paused for a moment, letting their words settle inside her heart. Another shadow. Another place where silence had grown too thick. She stepped forward and said, "I want the story." Her editor looked at her with the weary respect of someone who knows he cannot change the mind of a force of nature. He nodded slowly and said, "Then go find the truth." And so she began. Nellie disguised herself once again, adopting the worn clothes and quiet posture of a young woman desperate for work. She stepped into the agency building, where dim lamps flickered along narrow walls, and the smell of damp papers clung to the air. A man behind the counter watched her with cold disinterest, his eyes sharp like someone who measured people by what they could profit from. "I am looking for a position," she said softly. He told her to wait, and she sat on a cracked wooden bench among other women, their faces pale with worry, some clutching small bags containing all they owned, some holding babies who whimpered softly. Nellie observed each detail, the exhaustion, the fear, the helpless vulnerability that hovered over them like a heavy fog. She knew that the world often forgot women like these, because power rarely listened to their voices. But she would listen. When the man returned, he led her into a cramped office and explained the terms of employment: long hours, meager wages, fees for placement, fees for housing, fees even for the paper she had just signed. The trap was clear, yet many women had no choice but to agree. Nellie kept her head down and accepted the position. Within hours, she was taken to a factory where the air was thick with dust, and the sound of grinding machines shook the walls. Rows of women worked with blistered hands and hollow eyes, their bodies bent over endless tasks that left them aching and exhausted. Nellie joined them, feeling the sting of harsh chemicals on her fingertips, the ache in her back, the suffocating pressure of a system built to drain every ounce of strength from the powerless. She listened to their stories, whispered between shifts. Some had been promised comfortable homes, others had been told they would earn enough to support their families. Instead, they found themselves trapped in endless cycles of debt. Days passed, and Nellie documented everything inside her mind. She memorized the conditions, the wages, the exploitation, and the despair. She witnessed the way the managers barked orders without compassion, the way the agency profited from the desperation of immigrant women who only wanted to survive. At night, she returned to her small makeshift room where the walls were thin and cold. She lay awake listening to the city breathing outside, and she replayed every moment in her heart. This was not simply journalism, it was justice. After gathering enough evidence, she left the factory and returned to the newsroom, her clothes still carrying the scent of metal and sweat. She sat again at her desk and wrote with fierce clarity, revealing the truth behind the agency and the factory conditions. Her story was published, and once again the city shook awake. The public demanded change, investigations were launched, fines were issued, and the agency was forced to close its doors. Women who had been trapped were finally released. Nellie walked through the streets as snow fell softly around her, and felt a quiet warmth in her chest. She thought of the women whose stories she had carried, and she hoped they felt a little lighter that night. But with each victory came another calling. She felt the world whispering again, another injustice, another forgotten corner. And Nellie Bly, a woman with unshakable purpose, prepared to step into the darkness once more, because the truth always needed someone brave enough to follow it wherever it led. Spring drifted into the city with a gentle warmth, yet Nellie felt the fire inside her growing brighter than ever, because each story she uncovered revealed another doorway leading to deeper shadows. The world was large and full of secrets, and she knew she had only touched the surface. One afternoon, while she sat beside her window watching the sunlight slip across the crowded streets, she felt a stirring in her heart, a whisper calling her beyond New York, beyond everything she had known until now. She realized that her curiosity was not meant to stay in one place. Her courage belonged to the world. There was a challenge whispered among reporters, a challenge that no woman had ever dared, a journey around the world faster than any traveler before her, inspired by a famous adventure novel that had captivated the imagination of millions. 72 days. That was the impossible goal. Many laughed at the idea that a woman could attempt such a journey alone. They said she was too fragile, too inexperienced, too unprepared. They listed all the reasons she would fail, but Nellie heard only one thing: go. Her heart beat faster. She felt the familiar pull of destiny tightening around her spirit. She walked into the office of her editor and said, simply, "I want to travel around the world." He looked at her long and hard, as though trying to decide whether she was asking for a story or asking for her own legend. "I will try to get permission," he said, "but do not hope for much." Nellie met his eyes with calm certainty. "If you say no, I will go for another paper." And with that single promise, her fate was sealed. Permission was granted, and the newsroom buzzed with disbelief and excitement. Nellie prepared, quickly packing only what she could carry: a lightweight bag, a few clothes, and the steel-rooted confidence that had carried her through every challenge before. On a misty November morning, she stepped onto the ship that would carry her across the ocean. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she watched New York fade into the distance behind her, and she whispered a quiet vow to herself. "I will make it. I will prove them wrong." The sea stretched endlessly before her, the ship rocking gently beneath her feet. She felt small and powerful at the same time, a single woman braving the vast unknown with nothing but her determination and the belief that every boundary placed on her was meant to be shattered. Days passed as she journeyed across the Atlantic. The ocean roared beneath storm-colored skies and calm horizons, the waves rising like mountains and falling into soft troughs. She spent long hours on the deck, breathing in the salt, heavy air, watching the world unroll before her eyes. When she reached Europe, she moved swiftly through bustling ports and crowded train stations, each moment a race against time. She learned to read timetables, map routes, negotiate passage with ship captains, and navigate unfamiliar streets with a confidence that surprised even herself. She met people from every corner of the world: sailors, merchants, travelers, dreamers, each with stories that widened her understanding of humanity. She carried their voices with her like quiet companions on her journey. In France, she missed a connecting ship by mere minutes. Her heart lurched with the weight of lost time, but she did not break. She quickly found another route, refusing to surrender even a single moment to doubt. In Italy, she boarded another vessel, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her heart burning with urgency. The world felt enormous, yet she moved through it with a grace that defied every expectation placed upon her. As the days ticked forward, Nellie became more than a journalist. She became a symbol, a lone figure racing across continents with nothing but courage guiding her steps. Newspapers tracked her progress, crowds gathered to cheer her on, her name echoed in streets she had never walked. She felt the world watching. But she did not run for fame. She ran because something deep within her knew that every step she took was a step for all the women told that they could not, should not, must not. She reached Asia, where the air smelled of spices and the sounds of markets filled the streets. She saw landscapes she had only dreamed of. Mountains rising like ancient guardians, oceans alive with shimmering reflections, and cities glowing with life. She felt herself expanding with each new place, each new discovery. This journey had become more than a race. It had become a testament to the power of one determined soul, and Nellie Bly was far from finished. With every sunrise, she moved closer to her goal, closer to the shores of home, closer to becoming the woman the world never expected but deeply needed. The clock kept ticking. Her courage kept burning. And the world kept watching as she raced toward a destiny no one believed she could reach. The days unfolded like pages of a living atlas as Nellie pushed onward, her spirit steady even when exhaustion tugged at her limbs. She had crossed oceans and continents, and still the journey stretched ahead like a road of endless possibility, yet she held firmly to her belief that she could outpace doubt, time, and every limitation placed before her. In Hong Kong, she stepped onto the bustling streets where lanterns swayed gently in the warm wind and the hum of voices blended with the clatter of carts moving along narrow paths. She felt the press of time like a hand against her back, urging her forward, always forward. She boarded another ship bound for the next leg of her journey, watching the glowing shoreline fade into the distance as night settled across the water. During the long voyage, she often stood at the rail, the sea air brushing against her cheeks. As she stared into the vast dark expanse, she thought about the women she had met in the asylum, the workers trapped in factories, the countless souls whose stories she had carried like fragile lanterns through shadows. She wondered if they knew how deeply they had shaped her, how their courage had woven itself into her own. The ship carried her into the Indian Ocean where the days were scorching and the nights fragrant with warm winds. She watched the horizon shift from deep blues to fiery golds each sunrise, reminding her of the passing hours, ticking steadily toward her challenge. She listened to sailors tell stories of storms, beasts, and legends of the sea. She shared laughter with them and found comfort in their kindness. She reached the port of Colombo where the scent of tea and spices carried through the air and the markets were alive with vibrant colors. She felt the pulse of a world so distant from her own yet beautifully connected through the simple rhythm of human life. Her journey had taught her that everywhere she went people wished for the same things: safety, dignity, love, hope. Her train through the island rushed past rolling hills and mist-covered mountains, each moment a reminder that she was seeing the world in a way most never could, and she carried a deep gratitude for every mile. But the pressure of the challenge tightened with each day. She knew she was close to falling behind the schedule she had set. She felt the weight of the expectations of those watching back home, the doubt of those who never believed a woman could attempt such a feat. Yet she refused to surrender. When she reached Singapore, the news she received nearly shook her resolve. The ship she needed to cross the Pacific had left earlier than expected, leaving her stranded thousands of miles from home. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment the world seemed to tilt. But she steadied herself. "I will not let this stop me," she whispered. She searched the port for any chance, any opening, any vessel heading east. She pleaded with captains, negotiated routes, and finally found a ship leaving sooner than any other, yet it still threatened her timeline. She boarded anyway, because she understood something that few ever grasp. Courage grows in the moments where fear tries to take root. The Pacific journey was merciless. The sea surged with relentless power, waves slamming hard against the hull. Storms gathered like dark giants across the horizon, and the ship rocked violently in the wind. Passengers clung to rails, trembling in fear, but Nellie stood strong, feeling the storm roar around her. She knew that nature did not bow to human ambition. She respected the sea, yet she did not fear it. She whispered a quiet prayer that the world would allow her to finish what she had begun. When the storms passed and the ship cut through calmer waters, she spent her nights listening to the soft splash of waves, her thoughts drifting to home. She imagined the coastline of America, the moment she would set foot again on familiar soil, and the cheers of those who believed in her. She reached San Francisco and felt a surge of emotion so strong it almost brought her to her knees. She had made it back to her country, but she was not finished yet. She raced from the port to the nearest train station, the minutes slipping away like sand through her fingers. The journey across the American countryside was a blur: rolling plains, snow-capped mountains, great stretches of desert, and quiet towns flickered past the windows. As she pressed a hand to the cool glass, she could feel her heart pounding in her throat. She was so close. The train thundered eastward, carrying her across the land that had shaped her, the land that had watched her rise from a determined young writer to a woman racing against the limits of the world. As she neared New York, she felt the final spark ignite within her, a fire that had carried her across oceans, storms, continents, and doubt. She had not come this far to fall short. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered, "I am almost home." And the city waited for her. The world waited. And Nellie Bly raced on. The final miles toward New York carried a weight unlike anything Nellie had felt before. The train rushed across the land with a fierce, unstoppable rhythm, yet time still felt too slow, too fragile. She pressed her palm against the window, feeling the tremble of steel beneath her fingertips, as if the whole world were moving in harmony with her heartbeat. Outside, snow drifted across empty fields like whispers of winter brushing gently against the earth. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the landscape, and for a moment, Nellie felt suspended between exhaustion and triumph. She thought of all the places she had touched, all the faces she had seen, all the moments that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She remembered standing on the decks of distant ships, the spray of ocean waves cooling her sun-warmed skin. She remembered the press of crowds in foreign streets, the rhythm of languages she could not speak yet somehow understood. She remembered the storms that had tried to break her, the long nights when she had curled beneath thin blankets, listening to the heartbeat of the sea. And now the familiar pulse of America's rails carried her home. When the train began to slow as it approached the edges of New York, Nellie's breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, her eyes straining toward the blurred lights rising in the distance. She could almost feel the electricity of the city, the restless energy that had always fueled her every ambition. As she stepped onto the platform, a sound rose around her like a wave, voices cheering, hands clapping, feet shuffling in excitement, and there in the crowd, she saw reporters, citizens, children holding newspapers with her name printed boldly across the front page. She had not expected such a welcome. She had not imagined her journey had captured so many hearts. She felt her throat tighten with emotion. A woman who had once fought for a single opportunity now stood embraced by a world that had doubted her. Her editor pushed through the crowd, eyes shining with an excitement she had never seen before. "You did it," he said, breathless. "You actually did it." "How many days?" she asked quietly, though she already knew. 72 days, he replied. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a warmth bloom through her chest. 72 days. She had raced around the world faster than anyone imagined possible. A woman who had been told she was weaker, slower, incapable had shattered expectations with every step she took. But amidst the celebration, Nellie felt something deeper rising within her, a realization that this journey, though extraordinary, was not the peak of her life, but a testament to what she was meant to continue doing. She was not a symbol, she was a storyteller. And the world was still full of stories waiting in silence. That night, she returned to her small apartment where familiar shadows rested along the walls. She set down her travel bag and stood quietly in the center of the room, listening to the stillness. It felt so different from the restless rhythm of ships and trains, yet she welcomed the calm. She lit a single lamp, its glow spilling across the room like a warm embrace, and she looked at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. She saw the woman who had stepped into an asylum disguised as a lost girl, the woman who had labored beside exploited workers, the woman who had circled the globe with nothing but courage stitched into her bones. The world would never look at her the same way again. And she would never look at the world the same way either. The following days were filled with interviews, speeches, celebrations. Her name echoed through newspapers across the country. Young girls clipped her articles and tucked them beneath their pillows, dreaming of futures larger than the world had told them to expect. But Nellie remained humble. She smiled, she spoke kindly, she accepted the praise, yet she never let it build a cage around her. She knew that success was not a destination, but a doorway leading to deeper work. One evening after the applause had faded, she sat beside the window, watching the city glow beneath the night sky. She thought about her next steps, the stories still hidden in the shadows, the injustices still waiting for someone to lift the veil. She whispered into the quiet, "There is more to do." Her eyes softened with determination. Because a journey around the world had not been the end of Nellie Bly. It had only been the proof of who she truly was. A woman who refused to be ordinary, a woman who did not wait for permission, a woman who stepped into the impossible and walked out triumphant. A woman whose courage had become a compass for thousands. She breathed deeply, felt the world settling around her, and let her heart speak the truth. "I will keep going." And the night outside her window shimmered softly, as if the universe itself nodded in agreement. The days that followed moved gently like a soft current, guiding Nellie into the next chapter of her life. Yet beneath that gentleness lived a steady pulse, calling her toward new horizons. She had returned from her journey with more than triumph. She had returned with a deeper understanding of the world and a clearer sense of purpose. Her spirit felt larger, fuller, shaped by the wisdom she had gathered on every distant shore. But the world was changing, and Nellie could feel the tremors of that change echoing through the city, through the nation, through every quiet place where voices long unheard were beginning to rise. She knew her work was far from finished, because truth was not a single flame, it was a fire that needed tending again and again. She stepped back into journalism with the same fierce devotion that had defined her earlier years, uncovering corruption, exposing injustice, and telling the stories of those who had been pushed into the shadows. She understood now more than ever that her pen was not just a tool, it was a lifeline for those who had none. After years of reporting, Nellie felt another shift pulling her forward. She entered the world of industry, determined to continue shaping change. She became the head of her own company, a manufacturer of steel barrels and containers, working alongside the men on the factory floor, refusing to let titles or expectations separate her from the people whose labor built the world. She admired their resilience, their grit, their humanity. She walked the aisles of the factory each day, learning the machines, understanding the rhythm of production, listening to the concerns of her workers. She wanted them to feel safe, valued, respected, and she stood firmly beside them even when times were difficult. She believed leadership was not about commanding from above, but walking shoulder to shoulder. Her compassion was not soft, it was powerful. Her strength was not loud, it was unwavering. And the workers felt it. They came to her with their worries, with their ideas, with their hopes, and she met them with honesty and warmth. Her company grew, but more importantly, the people within it grew as well. She gave jobs to women who had been overlooked. She promoted those who had been underestimated. She built a place where fairness lived at the center. Yet she remained restless, not with dissatisfaction, but with possibility. The world still carried wounds, the world still held stories, the world still needed someone willing to step into discomfort for the sake of truth and justice. When war erupted across the oceans, Nellie knew she could not remain on the sidelines. She traveled to the front lines as a reporter, determined to tell the human stories buried beneath the thunder of conflict, the cries of families, the uncertain futures of young soldiers. She stood among them in muddy trenches, feeling explosions rattle the ground beneath her. She listened to their fears, to their longing for home, to their determination to survive, and she wrote their stories with tenderness and clarity, bringing their experiences to the world. She visited hospitals where injured soldiers lay silent and pale. She held their hands, she spoke softly to them, she carried their emotions inside her heart, and she wrote with a depth shaped by everything she had lived. Even in war, she remained a seeker of truth. Even in devastation, she remained a bearer of hope. As the years passed, Nellie became a symbol of courage, not because she sought recognition, but because she had lived her life, refusing to bend to limitations. She had opened doors simply by walking through them. She had shown the world that bravery was not shaped by gender or circumstance, but by the fire within. Her later years softened with quiet reflection, yet that fire never dimmed. She continued to write, to advocate, to dream, and to inspire. She often sat near her window, gazing at the sun dipping into the horizon, thinking about every journey that had carried her forward. The asylum, the factories, the ships, the storms, the trains, the battlefields, each memory alive in her heart. She thought of the young women who wrote to her thanking her for showing them a world larger than they had been told to expect. She thought of the reporters who followed her path with determination. She thought of the lives changed because she had dared to speak. Toward the end of her life, she carried no regret, only gratitude. Gratitude for the battles she had fought, for the risks she had taken, for the people she had helped, for the truths she had revealed. Gratitude for the courage that had never abandoned her even when fear brushed against her soul. And when her final days approached, she closed her eyes with a peaceful knowing that she had lived boldly, she had lived purposefully, she had lived in service to justice. Her legacy did not settle quietly. It echoed. It grew. It lived on in every woman who dared to chase a dream, in every reporter who sought truth over comfort, in every voice that rose against silence, in every soul who believed that boundaries existed only to be crossed. Nellie Bly had entered the world as a girl searching for opportunity. She left it as a woman who changed history. A woman whose courage traveled across generations like a lantern passed from hand to hand, lighting the way for all who followed. And her story continued long after her final breath, because courage like hers does not end. It becomes a map for others. A reminder that the bravest journeys begin with a single heartbeat whispering, "Go."